It's my great pleasure to welcome up Yasmina Farber, French journalist and the maker of this movie that you just saw. Johnny Bissakonou, who is a journalist from the Central African Republic and a member of Invisible Children. Véronique Lönnerblad, who is the executive director of UNICEF Sweden. And please welcome back Mr. Ambassador Jean-Pierre Lacroix and Margot Wallström. Some 2 years have passed since this movie was directed, but Kony is still not found and arrested. Meanwhile, the Central African Republic have become involved in a brutal armed conflict with enormous suffering for the civilian population. I'm very happy to introduce you to the maker of this movie, Yasmina Farber. A couple of years have passed since you made this movie. I guess you have continued to follow the situation in the Central African Republic, CAR, as we sometimes say. Are we any closer to seeing Kony captured today?
No, unfortunately, I don't think so for the moment, even if there were some rumors of new negotiation with the war commander. But it's not so close because I called recently the NGO in Bangui, and they told me that there were still new attacks. So in Obo, the last place we saw with the priest, a few days ago, they came in and they still abducted and take people. So it's very difficult right now, and Johnny was telling me that the LRA is playing with the situation in the country, which is terrible, with a new rebellion. So there is less security, if it's possible, that it's less than 2 years ago, and they can attack again, and they can go out of the bush, and it's still continuing. So it's very difficult to see that, even if the people are brave and courageous. And fortunately, we took some news of the young girls and boys we met, so they are okay and they are safe right now. So I was really happy to get some news of them, because I was also scared then that the young boys in this chaos of the new civilian war, that maybe they could take weapons again. So it's not the case for the moment. They're safe, and the NGO is following their case. But Kony is still free in the bush.
The situation at the moment is very difficult, and a very difficult humanitarian situation, and a very difficult security situation. And I think there are also signs now that the LRA is more active during the last few months than before. What is your view on that, and what is the hope we can find here?
On one side, they are more active, but on the other side, they're really few. So, and the news we have is also that Kony is getting old and sick. And also, the good news is that many adults and commanders, they're coming back and they're surrendered to the authorities, because they were told that they will not be pursued, and they will be safe if they come out of the bush. So there are two movements now. On one side, they continue in the bush. On the other side, certain officers, they surrender. So maybe the movement is weakened, and Kony is weak, but with very few people, they have this power to terrorize the population, which continues because it's an old situation.
Thank you. I'd like to turn to Johnny Bissakonou. You are a journalist from CAR, and you run a blog called Echo de Centrafrique, Echoes from Central Africa. In December, you had to leave the Central African hell, as you wrote on your blog. What made you take the decision to leave?
Alors, j'ai dû quitter la Centrafrique parce que ma vie était menacée. Je fais partie des rares personnes qui ont dénoncé les exactions commises sur la population civile par la coalition rebelle qui a pris le pouvoir en Centrafrique, et pour ça, j'ai été menacé de mort. Et j'ai même perdu mon petit frère qui a été assassiné par la coalition Sileka.
We will have a translator here, please.
Yes, I had to left the Central African Republic because my life was threatened. I was one of the few people denouncing the exactions of the rebel coalition Seleka, and my young brother died a few weeks ago. Well, in December, well, before I left.
I know that you and your family have suffered greatly from this conflict. What is the situation now for your family?
J'ai encore mes frères qui sont à l'aéroport parce que l'aéroport est protégé par l'armée française, et c'est l'un des rares endroits sécurisés pour le moment en Centrafrique. C'est très difficile pour les réfugiés de regagner leur domicile parce que dans les quartiers, les lynchages continuent, les massacres continuent. Et donc, du coup, à Bangui, les gens sont dans les camps de réfugiés, mais dans l'arrière-pays, la situation est encore plus compliquée parce que les gens qui fuient les villages, qui fuient les hostilités dans les villages, ils sont dans la brousse. Et donc aujourd'hui, même les réfugiés qui sont à l'aéroport, ils sont 100 000 dans des conditions d'hygiène, mais vraiment difficiles parce qu'il n'y a pas de toilettes. Il y a même des épidémies, par exemple de rougeole qui s'est déclarée au monastère où il y a des milliers de personnes.
Yes, my brothers are at the airport. A lot of people are at the airport because the area is protected by the French army. 100,000 people are there at the airport. And it is one of the few secure places in the Central African Republic. It is impossible to go back to the neighborhoods because people are lynched, are massacred. And the situation in villages is even worse in the bush. But even at the airport, the sanitation is very bad. There are outbreaks of measles in monasteries. The situation is bad everywhere.
You were active in CAR, sending come home messages to child soldiers. What happened to these kids when they come home? Are they reintegrated?
Normalement, c'est ce qu'on leur dit quand on fait les messages de défection à la radio. Moi, mon rôle, c'est d'aller dans ces villages et de former les villageois aux techniques de production radiophonique. Et eux, ils utilisent les parents des victimes pour leur dire « N'ayez pas peur, ce qu'on vous dit dans la brousse, c'est faux. Si vous rentrez à la maison, vous ne serez pas poursuivis en justice, vous ne serez pas bannis de la société, au contraire. Il y a des programmes de réinsertion sociale pour vous. » Mais malheureusement, justement, aujourd'hui, il y a plein d'enfants qui ne veulent plus qu'on les utilise pour appeler les autres à sortir parce qu'ils se disent, depuis qu'on est sorti, on est abandonné à notre triste sort, on n'a rien, on souffre, on est mieux en brousse parce qu'en brousse, on fait ce qu'on veut, on peut piller un village et prendre tout ce qu'on veut.
Well, normally, that is what happens. That is what the kids are told, that they will be safe and that they can escape. My job is to train villages, to train them to use the radio as a media to call the kids to come back home, to tell them, do not be afraid, you won't be prosecuted. There will be reinsertion programs, you will be reintegrated, but unfortunately, it's not that easy. And the kids do not want to work and to continue to send those messages. Some refuse that. They say, well, we are back, but we are suffering even more. It was better in the bush. We could do what we wanted. We could loot. We could get what we wanted. Here we are alone. We are suffering.
Thank you. I'd like to turn to Véronique now from UNICEF. In the film, we saw the UN Special Representative, Leila Serouji, speak about CONI's use of child soldiers. And some weeks ago, Leila spoke in front of the Security Council, and she claims that there are around 6,000 child soldiers present with armed groups in CAR at the moment. And she says they have been manipulated by both sides and divided along religious lines. What happens to children in armed conflict, and what can we do to support them and protect them?
I'm glad that you are asking me this question, because I think that the situation, the issue of child soldiers has to be looked in the context of what happens to children in armed conflicts. And maybe turning a child into a child soldier is the worst thing you can do to a child, with the exception of killing that child. And it is a war crime. I think we have to repeat it once and once again. It is a war crime. But basically, during an armed conflict, you can see that children see all their rights being violated. Either it's the right to health, the right to education, of course, the right to protection and care. So their right to live and thrive is abolished. So from UNICEF, we work with all those rights, with simple things like delivering water, vaccines, having schools in tents and so on. When it comes to child soldiers, there are some very specific aspects that we work with, one being, of course, negotiating their liberation. And when it comes to CAR, I think that since the beginning of January, we managed to liberate 40 children. It's a lot. It's far too little, of course. And of course, we work with their traumas. They may very well be long life. I mean, they may have their traumas for their whole life, but still. And we work also with their reintegration, because just as you have described and as seen in the film, it's a very, very difficult part. So, children in armed countries, in armed conflicts, there are many. I think we talk about 1 billion children, and we know that today of all children suffering of malnutrition, 2/3 come from those countries having armed conflicts. So I'm very glad for this initiative that we have tonight, because the world has to react, but also to act very, very simply, and there is a lot to do. It's a shame for the whole world that Connie can still be free. That man has to be sentenced. No impunity should be allowed.
The UN Secretary General publishes an annual report on the situation of children in armed conflict every year. And for the latest report, he claims that there are 22 situations in 21 countries where children are abused and used as fighters, as cooks, spies, or for sexual purposes. Could you tell us a little bit more on how UNICEF is working?
I would like to add that I used them for many more things than being slaves, than being wives, than being cooks. They are used as targets. They are used as shields. They are used for many, many more things. They are used for very dangerous situations, very different work, connected to the conflict situation. And this was shown last week in a report going to the Security Council about Syria. I mean, that report shows so much about what happens to children. And so if you add that the risk for being kidnapped, the risk for losing your life, the risk of being injured, mutilated, raped, and whatever, the level of sufferance for those children is unbelievable. shock and unbearable.
Thank you, Véronique. Margot Wallström, in the movie we heard that Kony is abducting as many boys and girls, but we don't hear so much about that, probably. What could the world do to better support the girl victim?
I'm thinking, well, first of all, what everybody can do is to pay for a girl to go to school. You know, if you really think about something you would like to do yourself, pay for a girl to go to school wherever in the world you choose. That's the best way to prevent this from happening also in many places around the world. In this particular situation, of course, the girls and boys have to be protected likewise. But I'm thinking about something else, because what this movie shows really is the need to make sure that there is psychological and psychiatric help afterwards. And I remember that still in Liberia, at least a few years ago, there was only one psychiatrist. They had one psychiatrist for the whole country, and they lived for 14 years with the civil war, with so many wounds and so many scars in society that had to be dealt with. Maybe if we should make an international effort to say, let's support in every possible way the attempts to help them to recover from that horrible experience. Maybe that could be something the European Union could do, to say we will, do one thing or give priority to one thing, except for sending soldiers and helicopters, hopefully. But we will definitely make sure that they can have the expertise to deal with their traumas, because otherwise this lives on. And a country will not recover or come back if they are not helped. So I just think that there is one real task for us to deal with.
Thank you, Margot. Ambassador, France is one of the few countries which has called for and also taken action, concrete action, in the case of the situation in the Central African Republic. Alongside African troops, French soldiers have patrolled parts of CAR since some months back. And apparently French has an interest in Francophone Africa, but still, at least for me, it's hard to understand why no other European country has decided to, or seemed willing to, risk their own troops on the ground in the Central African Republic.
I will answer to your question, but before that, I would just like to make a point. You mentioned impunity. The film talks about impunity, and I think everybody can see how impatient all these children are to see their Joseph Kony and his lieutenant brought to justice. So I think it's really important to insist on the fact that impunity is absolutely key to appease the victims and to bring an end to all the tensions, all the damages that have been created by the militias such as the LRA. And then turning to your question, I think that when urgent action is needed in some part of Africa, then only the African themselves, and maybe France today, are able to respond. And that's just because of the current situation in which we are. The French have some sort of pre-positioned assets and the African in Africa, and the Africans are in Africa. But they need more support, and they need more assistance from the international community to be more efficient in their missions. And I think when it comes to the European Union, it is not equipped, as of yet, to react in urgency, in emergency cases. That can just not happen. But that doesn't mean the European Union and the European partners are not doing anything. It just means that it takes more time to bring them in. But that is happening as we speak. The same way it happened on other situations in Africa and in the rest of the world. It takes time because it takes a political decision by the EU to send troops, and then it takes all the individual partners to go through to first of all decide whether they will participate and how, and then they have to go through their procedures. So we understand that. What is important is that, as far as the French are concerned, we've had political support from the outset, both in Mali and now in the Central African Republic. We've had, crucially important as well, the support from the African and the African unions and the regional organization. And as we have been sort of moving ahead in the missions, then we felt it is important to have other European partners on the ground. So it is happening in Mali. A couple of European countries are participating in some security-related missions in Mali, and right now a European force has been created, and some European countries are looking at a possible participation in that force. And the stakes are very important because the film shows it very clearly. There is need for more security. The African force is in the Central African Republic. It's actually being beefed up. The French are there. They're doing together what they can, but there is need for more security assets. So bringing in this European force will be absolutely crucial to ensure a better security situation in that country.
And in your opinion, what would the effect be of this European force? And when do you think we can see a UN-led military operation in CAR?
As far as the European force is concerned, the objective, I think, would be to have it deployed maybe within a month or a month and a half. The objective is to, as I said, reinforce the security assets in the Central African Republic. That particular mission of the European force will be to help securing the airport in the capital city, Bangui, and also help secure the provision of humanitarian assistance. And as was recalled in the Central African Republic today, almost 1 million people are displaced. Then you mentioned UN. We think it's crucially important that eventually we will have a UN operation in the Central African Republic. Why? Because the UN are the only organization that can run a complex integrated mission with both security and civilian aspects. And you see very clearly from the film, there is a need for more security, there is a need for humanitarian assistance, human rights, counseling and help, making sure that we rebuild a Central African state, we rebuild justice, law and order, etc., etc. The UN, however imperfect they are the only one to run all these missions together in an integrated way. And that is why we think there should be a UN operation in Central African Republic, and we are not the only one. I think the UN themselves, the Secretary General of the UN is of that opinion. Most of our partners in the Western world, most African countries as well. So I'm reasonably optimistic we will get there.
Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you. I would like to thank all of you for coming here tonight. I think the situation of children in armed conflict, but also the situation in the Central African Republic, needs a lot more of the world's attention. I think that is a conclusion that we all could agree on tonight. Thank you very much for joining us and celebrating the International Day of the against the use of the child soldiers. And thank you very much to this eminent panel and our guests.